Hi everybody. Okay, so I'm going to show you today how to create a background for your ink spot in the hopes that you can have this done for next class. Okay, a couple of things. I've made a new file obviously here, called it background for ink spot, and what you're going to do is go into your various vector shape options over here. You can choose whatever you want really. We'll start with the rectangle tool here, and then obviously you want to be thinking about things like color and what your fill is going to be. Are you going to have a stroke on this, the objects that are in the background or not? Remember also that under your window options you've got things like swatch libraries, like these awesome gradients I showed you in class as well. So here's our cool fruit and vegetable gradients, things like that. You can also, of course, create your own gradients, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. So let's say we've got this shape drawn here. If you want to alter your gradient, you can just click on your gradient tab. A lot of you guys are working with your menu and your palettes hidden. Have them out, because this sort of gives you a better idea of what you're dealing with in Illustrator and what your options are. So let's say you want to add some purple into this. You can simply pull it out of your color palette here and drag it down. And then to get rid of colors you don't want, you can drag them down and off of the gradient and move them along. Don't forget also in Illustrator, with the gradient tool, you can decide what way the gradient goes across the object. You can also dictate how much of each color is showing and in what part. It's really very user-friendly. Okay, so what we're going to be doing is using warping tools to make the background. And that's just one of your options. You can certainly use shapes and patterns and different things, symbols you might be able to find, but one of the fun things you can do in Illustrator is use these warping tools. So they'll be under this tool called the width tool here. Click and hold, and we'll start with the twirl tool for one thing. When you click with the twirl tool, it just does exactly what you think it's going to do. It twirls up the vectors. As you're clicking and holding and dragging, it will continue to curl things. If you want to make your cursor here a lot larger, you need to double click on the twirl tool, and you can change the width here. You can also change the angle if you want it to be doing something different. You can change the twirl rate. If you make it negative, it twirls one way. If you make it positive, it twirls the other way. You can also play with things like detail and simplification. So now you can see the cursor is much bigger. You can see how fast the object is changing, and you can see as I move it more, it's really sort of unpredictable. Other options under here are the crystallize tool. Can be pretty fun too. Exact same concept here. If you want to change any of the options, you double click the tool and you can play with those. We also have the wrinkle tool, which is not really as interesting. It just kind of makes a wrinkly shape, very sort of similar to the crystallize tool, except it's kind of a little bit more round. So if you zoom in, you can see that. So this is what the shape looks like if it's got a black stroke around the edge. Something you're going to need to remember, of course, is how to take the stroke off of any object that you've created. And you can do that by clicking on the stroke at the back here and choosing no fill. And then you have a little bit more seamless looking object when you click off of it. Okay, so this is a bit random, and I'm hoping that you'll come up with something that's perhaps a little bit more purposeful. This is just sort of an initial playing that you're doing. And don't forget, you've also got things like the pucker and bloat and the scallop tool too. This one is on the opposite direction. Let's fix that. Let's change it to this and see what happens. Play with all kinds of these things and just see what they do. This one seems to be scalloping edges inwards and making really sharp points pointing out. Okay, obviously pucker and bloat. Bloat makes things bigger. That's really fast. That was a really short click to make it, not go too fast. And then pucker pulls everything into a spot. Okay, so some cool things you can play with. Okay, so once you like this, part of your assignment also is to replicate, duplicate, and flip things around and make it look like an abstract ink spot. So the first thing you should do is hold Shift and shrink your object, because eventually your entire composition needs to fit within this artboard, which is your big main rectangle here. Okay, and that was maybe a bit too small, so I'm going to go a bit bigger. And of course, to rotate, you just need to hang your tool out the side here. I'm just on the main selection tool, and you can hang the tool outside and move it around. And the most simple way to copy and paste this is just to select the object. You go Edit, Copy, or obviously you've got Command C, Command X to cut, and Command V to paste. Those are shortcuts you should know like the back of your hand. So we've just copied, and now we're going to paste. And we can rotate it. You can overlap it. You can see that it's starting to lag with all these anchor points. So you can overlap it on top. You could also, under Object, you have Transform. You have things like Reflect. See what happens if you do a vertical reflect. Maybe that will fit better down here. So play around with this, and you're sort of trying to create an interesting composition. It's looking interesting now. So this guy, again, we've already copied it, so we can just do Command V again. Let's do a reflection with a horizontal reflection and see what we get. And rotate that around. It's getting a little more interesting. Not sure if that works. I sort of think it needs to be flipped completely, so you can just click it and flip it around. So all of this is really about sort of a visual puzzle you're kind of building together and working it out as you go. You sort of figure it out and see what looks good, what could change, what needs to be adjusted, etc. That's starting to look more interesting for sure. Okay, so then you'd flip another one in there and make it fit as well within the composition. This one still needs to be flipped over. Yeah, hopefully that sort of works. Great. Use the hand tool to make it to move around your screen and fit the image in the right spot. Looks like that one got a little bit shorter or smaller than the rest. Other thing you can do is grab all of them at once like this, and then of course you can shrink them all together as one unit to fit it back into the artboard. So I encourage you to make a few different ones of these. So you might like one a little better versus the other because there's so many different possibilities with this. And play around with it. And then you also need to be thinking about things like your colors. How does it relate to the face that you've already drawn that you're putting into this image? How many times are you going to flip the face that you're putting into this here? And you know, what sort of imagery could you sort of be pulling out in your designs that kind of relates to the person that you chose to do? So for instance, this is just randomly started to look like an eagle's head here and a wing. Wouldn't it be neat if somehow that was related to what you were doing? So think about those sorts of things. You can also just go in and use the regular old shape tools and see what kind of cool things you can make there. Another neat option is the flare tool creates some interesting designs as well. So you can play around with that and see what it does. You can change the colors in there too. See if you can figure that one out. Okay, so that's all for now. I'm going to do another tutorial for you on how to group your picture once you've figured out how to fill it and you're ready to start flipping it. So happy designing!